Well, welcome to the budget workshop. Today is Wednesday, March 4th, 2020. We're going to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and then a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. All right, we're going to start the council workshop. First on the agenda is fiscal year 18-19 audit presentation.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to invite Matt from our auditing firm to come up. Matt, you can either use the podium or sit at the table. Your choice.
All right.
He is with McKinley Cooper, who is our auditing firm. Council, y'all were given copies of the final audit, and Matt's here to discuss that with you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Council, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. Won't take up too much of your time. The audit reports, they get more and more cumbersome each year, so I promise I'm not going to read you 60-something pages. Do just want to go over a few things. Before I get started, just want to thank the staff. During our time for the audit, they provided us all the information we needed in a timely manner, so really appreciate their hard work. We do bring a lot of people and ask a lot of information in the span of a few days, so really do appreciate all of their hard work. Just want to start real quick with the independent auditors report, as this is the report from the independent auditors to the city. It just states that we've audited the accompanying financial statements of all activities. It details management's responsibility for the financial statements, which is the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. It also details our responsibility as independent auditors, and our responsibility is to express an opinion on these financial statements based on our audit. An audit involves performing procedures to obtain audit evidence about the amounts and disclosures in the financial statements. The procedures selected depend on the auditor's judgment, including the assessment of the risk of material misstatement of the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error. On the next page, we do state our opinion that the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, business type activities, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information of the city of TK as of September 30, 2019. A lot of information there, a lot of verbiage, really all to say we have a clean audit opinion, an unmodified audit opinion. That's the best opinion you can get. No deficiencies, no material weaknesses, anything like that. So very good audit opinion. And again, thank you to the staff for all of their hard work on that. Just want to point out a few things within the audit. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. I will just point out real quickly in the management's discussion and analysis, which is right after the independent auditor's report. On page 6, there's some good information here, comparative year to year. And so we'll just go over these real quickly. The net position, governmental activities, total assets for the year, $27 million. Deferred outflows of resources, $2.1 million. Total liabilities, $21.8 million. Deferred inflows of resources, $20,000. So we have a positive total net position of $7.7 million for the year. And you can see the breakdowns of the net position between the invested and capital assets, restricted and unrestricted. Business type activities for the year, 2019, $23.6 million in assets. Deferred outflows of resources, $380. Total liabilities, $17.9. Deferred inflows of resources, $10,000, and again, a positive total net position for the year of $6.1 million, broken down into our categories again. On the next page, we do have our changes in the net position for the year. These are our revenues less our expenses. So for our governmental activities, total revenues, $12,414 in thousands of dollars. Expenses, $12,438, so a deficiency of $24,000 for the year. Business activities, $58,34, expenses of $57,02, so a positive $132 for the year. Overall, total positive $108,000 increase in net position for the year. There's a lot of information in the management's discussion and analysis, very good information, but I won't read all that to you. Again, starting on page 10, we do have our financials. We just went over these kind of in a brief overview within the management discussion and analysis. Won't go over those, but again, a lot more detail on these first 2 pages. On these first 2 pages, this is our government-wide financial statements. It's our first set of financial statements within our governmental financials, 10 and 11. And then starting on page 12, we have our fund financial statements, and the difference between these 2 sets of financial statements are our long-term assets and our long-term liabilities. And so our balance sheet for our governmental funds, primarily our general fund and then our other governmental funds, total assets for the year $5.6 million, total liabilities for the year $895. So you can see the difference between having the long-term assets and liabilities on your balance sheet, as before you had a lot more capital, 20 million, debt, 20 million debt. And also I do just like to mention on the debt on your net position, you do have that net pension liability number in there that you remember from GASB 68 6 years ago implemented. That's not a number that you can pay down. That's just your unfunded liability from the state retirement plan. So overall, on the governmental funds, total fund balances, $4.5 million for the year, so very healthy fund balance on our governmental funds. Page 13 is a reconciliation between the 2 sets of financial statements that I mentioned. Again, I mentioned the capital assets, the difference between those and our debt. You can see some big numbers there, but that's primarily to reconcile the 2 sets of financial statements. On page 14, we do have our revenues and expenditures for our governmental funds. You can see $12.4 million in revenues, $15.932 in expenditures. Some other financing sources of $470,000, so a net change in fund balance of negative $3 million. I did just want to point out, you will remember from last year, we had a big swing up due to the debt proceeds for the police department. This year you had a big swing down because you spent those proceeds. And so did just want to point out that is a large number that's going down, but the reason for that. Page 15, again, another reconciliation between the 2 sets of financial statements, between what we talked about, primarily, again, capital assets and debt. Page 16 is just our revenues and expenditures again with budgeted amounts. So very good schedule there, as you can see the totals and the budgeted versus the actual for the year. Starting on page 17, we have our proprietary fund statements, and these are our business type. Again, there's no difference between these sets of financial statements versus the ones that we looked at in the management and discussion and analysis. The proprietary funds, since they act as a business in governmental accounting, they do require you to show the long-term assets and long-term liabilities on the fund financial statements. And again, so those numbers mirror what we looked over earlier in the management discussion and analysis. Just to cap that off for the year, on page 19, we did have a positive change in net position for the enterprise funds, proprietary funds of $131,000. Page 20 on our cash flows for our proprietary funds, everyone's favorite statement. It's very confusing, but essentially this is our beginning of year cash to our end of year cash, and we get that from our operating activities, non-capital, capital, and then investing activities. So we did have a positive increase in cash for the year between the enterprise funds of $742,000 for an ending cash balance as of September 30 of $1.9 million. So that's our basic financial statements. The notes to the financial statements, you're used to seeing year to year. There were no new regulations implemented this year, no new GASBs. There's new GASBs every year, but whether or not they apply to the municipality just depends on the municipality, but no new GASB implementations this year. On the notes, I won't bore you, I promise. I do just like to point out, again, some of our big assets and liabilities. Starting on page 31, you have your capital assets. These are your assets that you're going to depreciate over time. This is your infrastructure, your buildings, machinery, equipment. So I do like to point that out. And then starting on the bottom of page 32, your long-term debt footnote. A lot of information in here on your debt, as well as schedules about payments in future years. Those payments are as of 9/30. Again, if debt is added after that, those will change. Debt is paid down after that, those will change. But as of 9/30/2019, those are your debt schedules. Again, a lot of information, as I mentioned, net pension liability and the employee retirement system, starting on page 39. Again, information that you've seen the past couple of years. The numbers change, the verbiage really doesn't change, but those numbers come from PIBA every year, and so that does give you the information on the increases, decreases between the net pension liability, deferred inflows, outflows, and how that relates to your financial statements. Beyond your footnotes, you have some required supplementary information. Again, as far as with the pension information, that's really what you have there as your required supplementary information. The other supplementary information that we start with on page 52, a lot of good information here because this is a further breakdown. It gives more detail of your departments and those revenues and expenditures. Again, a lot of numbers back here from page 52 all the way through to the end of the report. So won't go into too much detail on that, but again, it does show your differences from your budget to your actual. So a lot of good information within your financial statements back there. Any questions?
Any questions? Is there anything that really sticks out in your opinion? Things unusual that you don't usually see?
No, sir. Nothing unusual. You know, again, I do harp on the GASB 68 net pension liability a lot. As you remember, again, 6 years ago, that really took your net position down a lot. For instance, my school districts that I do, they went from 70 million in net position to negative 40 million in net position. So a lot of times when you're looking at your financials, you kind of want to separate that a little bit to show, you know, what your financials truly are.
Anything else? No? Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Have a great meeting.
Move on to item B. Yes, sir. Capital projects planning module.
Yes, sir. Take just 1 second. We're going to get them hooked up. They're going to put the capital model up that they've built up on the screen. I'd like to introduce Walter Goldsmith and Amy Vittner, who will join us here at the table with First Tryon. They are our financial advisors. They're also here with Raj, and Raj will actually be driving the items on the screen. Council, as we discuss this, and Walter, y'all can sit here, or you can stand at the podium. It's totally up to you, whatever you're comfortable with.
Can I stand and point, and are y'all going to be able to see those screens at all?
If
All right, so how do we do that?
Raj needs to zoom in. Yeah, he's going to have to zoom, especially on that first screen. I noticed when he sent it, that one's tiny.
See that? Is it easier to move? Is it hard to move?
If you go that way, Walter, just make sure you take the handheld with you. So, can you push in a little further, Raj?
Okay.
Are we allowed to move? Stand in front of the big screen?
You can. I think before we start doing that, let's let Walter kind of introduce what this is and the reason why. I would love to be able to give y'all handouts from this, but it's a live document that has to be, configured, things turned on, turned off. It's got a lot of variables in it. So just printing out a sheet doesn't do it a whole lot of good. Yes, sir.
If you want me to, otherwise I'll
This
just
is
talk
different
loud.
than that one. Yes, sir. What?
We can hear just fine, but does he need to
Yeah.
be recorded?
Yeah, you got to take the handheld with you.
Okay, I think he's going to mic me.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Great.
So we'll let Walter and Amy introduce it as they start getting into detailed numbers that you want to see. Absolutely, it's a workshop. You want to go over and look at it. Just make sure if you've got comments, questions, come back to the mic, and I think we'll be fine.
So I'll do introductions, and then Amy can use the microphone, and you can tell
That'll
me
work.
if you can't hear. So just background introduction. I'm Walter Goldsmith. My colleague Amy Vittner and Raj Mundra is on the laptop in the back. So we're at First Tryon Advisors, headquartered in Charlotte. We serve as your independent financial advisor. So we're not a bank, we're not a lender, not a bond underwriter. You pay us just to give you independent financial advice. And we've got a fiduciary obligation by law to look out for your best interest. So we're not trying to sell you a product or steer you one way or the other. If I looked back 5 years ago, the phone calls we would get from clients like you all, it would be, hey, our council has gone through a long planning process. We decided we want to build XYZ project, Catawba Park. We need $3 million. We want to borrow it over 20 years. First Tryon to help us go get that money. We'd do an RFP out to banks. We would help you negotiate on interest rates, loan covenants, get the loan closed, get the money in your account, and then we'd go away. And the call we would get 9-10 months later from somebody in Charlie or Bob's position would be, hey, that project's going great. We're ready to start talking about the fire station or the new community center or the new water treatment plant. And we would say, gosh, if we had known that that call was going to come 9 months later, we might have given you different advice on the first financing. And so we're finance people, and we realized we needed to do a better job of long-range planning, and we started taking notes in just a big Excel document. We'd call and say, okay, well, that's great, Bob, you want to borrow this, but tell us what council might want to do next year and then the year after. And inevitably, that would sort of go into this big decision tree of, well, we might do this project, but it depends on if this happens, and if that doesn't happen, we're going to do this, but if that happens, then it might go this way. And so we started sort of mapping this out, and what it turned into is this capital planning model, which we build, you own, it's your document. It's just a big Excel spreadsheet, but designed to be very iterative, where we start with your wish list of all of the capital projects. So I always say no hidden list in anybody's hip pocket. Tell us everything that everybody might possibly want, and it's got on-off switches beside each project. And so if we turn it on, it's in the model, it's funded, and then we can say, what if we fund it with debt? What if we fund it with cash? What's the revenue stream that we want to use to pay for it? And sort of the home run scenario is if we can turn on every project that everybody wants, and there's not a tax increase needed, and your fund balance looks good, and you look good from a credit rating perspective and peer comps, then everybody in your chair says, that's great, we can fund that. Inevitably, we find that's not the case. If we start turning on all the projects, we start blowing through some ratio or covenant. Wow, if we borrow for all of those, then we're going to have to increase property taxes, and that's not acceptable. Or somebody says in your chair, well, why do we have all of this fund balance? Why don't we spend some of it? Let's not borrow. And what we didn't want was that you would ask that question, and we would say, that's a great question. Amy, Raj, and I will go back to the office, and we'll come back to you next month with an answer, because by the time we come back next month, everybody's forgotten the question or the information's changed. And so the idea of the model is if we spend about 10 minutes walking you through it, you'll see how it works. And then the goal is that in your chair, you just start asking the what if scenarios. Hey, can Catawba Park get funded? Can we do phase 1 and phase 2? What if we don't want to have a tax increase? What if we want our fund balance to grow to 25%? Was that too much fund balance? How does that look compared to peers? And have a dynamic tool that's a living, breathing tool. I say to clients, if you only use it once a year, it's probably not that effective. The idea is whenever during the year a new project comes on your radar screen, your knee-jerk reaction is, Charlie and Bob, run that through the model and let's see what it's telling us. And if we can afford it, great. And if we can't afford it, then we know we got to turn some other project off or delay a project or increase revenue sources. And so it's turned into a really great tool. We spent a lot of time with Bob and Charlie building it. It's not totally 100% built out, but it's really, really close. We still want to tweak some assumptions, but it's close enough that I think we wanted you to see it, start to get a sense of it so that you know that it's something that you've now got in your quiver. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Do you need to stand over here to see it? Okay. I'm glad to know other people can't see. All right. So big Excel spreadsheet, lots of tabs along the bottom. You all, as decision makers, are going to tend to live over to the left. The further you go over to the right, it gets into more and more granular detail, but everything is in there. It's just a big Excel spreadsheet. So on the dashboard, actually, let me go to the capital improvement plan tab first, Raj. And so this is the no hip pocket wish list of projects. We want everything that anybody could conceivably want. So a pumper truck, firing range indoor for the police department. We've got funded with new debt in the general fund. And Raj, if you go out to the right, these are the dollar amounts for when you're going to spend on a particular project. So $45,000 in 2020, or a project might span multiple years that's going to take a couple of years to build. And so as new estimates come in for a particular project, Charlie and Bob are going to go in and change, hey, that's not 128,000, that's 200,000 because construction cost inflation went up. If we turn a project off, Raj, if you'll just flip any one of these, it's going to gray it out of the model, so it takes it out. If we turn that back on, and we'll just stay with that one for the pickup trucks as an example, we can select whether we want to fund it with debt or cash. So drop-down menus. If we're going to fund it with cash, which fund does it come out of? So is it general fund, stormwater fund, fire impact? And each fund has its own tab that's built out with revenue and expense projections. So let's stay with that is general fund, cash funded for the pickup trucks, and out to the right, there should be a dollar amount in whatever year we've assumed that. So $30,000 in 2022. Everything on this tab totals up down at the bottom. If we scroll all the way down, you'll see a summary. So this is telling us the total from up above in terms of debt for the general fund is we need to borrow $173,000 in 2020. So you see how that is flowing through. The big line item is Parks and Rec, Catawba Park, $6.2 million. So that's the sort of giant. Then we would never do a borrowing every single year. We tend to say, what do we need for the next 3 years? And we'll do one borrowing now to be more efficient. And so this information now flows all the way back to the dashboard tab. So now that's telling us that same information. We need new debt for the Parks and Rec, what year we're going to borrow, how it's going to get funded, and how long we're going to amortize it over. So is it going to be a 5-year loan, 10-year loan, 15-year, and at what interest rate out to the right? So that's just driving, based on what we put on the CIP, when we need to borrow money and how long we're going to borrow and at what interest rate. And then, based on where you've put, so for example, this is telling us that we need new debt for the wastewater impact fee fund, $500,000 in 2023. If I go to that particular fund, I'm going to see the principal and interest payments hit. So let's go to the general fund as an example. So if I go to that tab, that is everything that your auditor just shared with you in terms of financial results. We've built in historical information. So I've got 3 years of every revenue, and if I scroll all the way down, every expense. And so we can start to say, let's look at a particular line item in expense for fire services. And Raj, if you'll expand that line out for fire services so that we can play with the growth rate. If I wanted to assume, we can hold on any one of it, doesn't really matter. Fire services, if I want to assume that salaries grow by 2% every year into the future. So I'm not just worried about the capital side, but if I build a new fire station, I got to staff it, so I got to hire new firemen, or if I just want to increase a cost of living increase on salary. So now I've got the ability to look at entire wish list of projects, when you're going to need the money, and the operating impact of that by fund. So every single fund that you've got built out. The borrowing summary tab, if we'll go to that one for a second, Raj. The value of a mill, and then the assumed growth rate. So I've got this growing at 0% so far, but if you said, well, I think over time the value of a mill is going to grow at 2%, we can put in that 2%. Similarly, if you said, you know, I'm worried that coronavirus is going to put us into a recession, let's assume that the value of a mill, that all new growth stops and it declines by 5% for a year, and then it starts to rebound. So we can see that, because you're not going to want to go out and borrow for a project if you think that, gosh, we can't withstand the shock of a recession. So we've got all of that built in. And Raj, let's go out to the right, the tabs out to the right, to the peer comps. Okay. So if I wanted to look at every South Carolina, flip it to North Carolina just as an example. If I flip to North Carolina, it's going to change all of my peers that fit that criteria of a minimum population of 0 and a max of 25,000. So if I go back to South Carolina, and flip it, yeah, to South Carolina. This is every city in South Carolina that has a population up to 25,000. Their key financial ratios displayed out to the right. And then let's go to the peer charts tab. And so you've heard us talk about fund balance as a percentage of revenues. So right now you're 64%, that's the orange bar. The gray bar is showing where you will be based on those inputs that I have turned on and how you stack up against that peer list. So this is just to put sort of in context. If somebody said, well, you know, let's go back to that capital improvements plan and let's flip all of those to cash funded instead of debt, because I hate debt. I don't think we should borrow. Let's spend our cash. Then you would see my fund balance, that gray bar, is going to drop down to something really low. And how do I stack up against my peers? And so we've got all of those ratios stacked out there to the right, and sort of how you look compared to your peers.
So why is, like, what's the difference between City of TKK up top and then City of TKK down next to all the peers?
It's the same. So that is showing 64 and that's showing 63.8. It's just rounding it off up there. Yeah, exactly.
So if we were to fund based on 2021 fund balance in all of those general categories, it would drop us down to 26.7%. So then we would become the lowest on that.
Based on the assumptions that I had. So you might look at that and say, you know, gosh, I don't want to be lowest in fund balance. And so, you know, let's go back then to the CIP and figure out what do we have turned on as cash funded, and let's not spend that cash. Let's instead either borrow for it, or, you know what, let's increase revenues, tax increase of some type, or let's cut expenses somewhere else. So now you can start to play with all of those what if scenarios really live, start to have a sense of it.
Everything on the first page was legit wish list and things that we've already did.
Charlie and Bob would say,
You talking about the CIP page?
yep.
Yes. Sorry.
So the CIP list came from the the approved CIP document that we have right now. Everything is not, so the things that have been completed aren't showing up on that list. We've moved those off. And then we've just recently had department heads do some updates. Most of those updates, with the exception of fire department, obviously Chief Hasty wasn't here during the CIP process. So he's got some new things. Everybody else's was really more, well, you know what, I had it in 2021, really can wait until 2023, yeah, and just moving dates around and things like that as far as the impact year that they're forecasting it. But going from that list, which we'll send council a copy of that, so that when we come back together April 29th for that workshop and really start talking about what are council's goals for the 2021 budget, we want to look at the CIP and as part of that and see, okay, what other things need to get added to it? So and just last fiscal year, we did midstream, we did a lot of recreation improvements and things like that. So just trying to forecast that out, not just for 2021, but also for subsequent years of what other capital things need to go in there. Also give you a chance to turn to your department heads and say, okay, why do you need this? What's the rationale behind that? Yeah, and just be able to have those conversations. So that's where the CIP list came from, was actually from the capital improvements plan that we have.
What about we met last fall, we went over all those needs.
On the strategic plan? Yes, ma'am. We're covering those on April 29th. Some are financial and are tied to the CIP. Some are just initiatives, new things that we're going to do that's really more staff time, not an actual capital investment. Katie's working through those, and that'll be what we start with on your April 29th workshop. Yes, ma'am.
And it's of the fund balance, your unassigned fund balance is really the chart that most people will look at, where you want that to be around 20% or so. So you're at 21%. And you might start to say, well, what is the right, is there a rule of thumb that we don't want to drop below 10%? And 20% is the good sort of recommended level. When I start to see people that have built up a lot more fund balance, it sometimes is either because they're really small and it doesn't take a lot of dollars to skew the percentage. They may be building up for a particular reason. Hey, we've been building up fund balance for 5 years because we know we want to build a new city hall and we want to pay cash for it. or a lot of times coastal areas that have a bigger risk of beach renourishment expenses, hurricane risk, will say, we just need to run with a larger fund balance because we recognize that we may have unforeseen expenditures.
Can you tell me about the A3 listed on here? So out of all of those, we're the only A3, and I assume that is tied to our debt ratio?
So your AA3, a credit rating, there are 3 rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. It's just like the credit score that we have. The better it is, the lower the interest rate when you go to borrow. If you can imagine a table, AAA is the highest. It's sort of like grades in school in terms of plus and minus on S&P and Fitch. They use it. So then you'd have AAA, then AA plus, AA minus. Moody's, instead of that plus minus, uses a 1, 2, 3 after it. So the categories are AAA, then AA1, AA2, AA3, which is where you are. So you were 4 notches from the highest. It's a really great credit rating given your small population and your small budget. Moody's, the analysts always like to say, their view is the bigger the ship, the bigger the waves it can take on. And so size, being a small entity, hurts you. If you said, we really want to be a AAA, that's important, or we want to get upgraded, fund balance is the largest driver of that. So when I look at this list, like Hardeeville at an A1 is actually lower than you. Sullivan's Island is higher than you. Walhalla is lower. Georgetown lower. So AA3 is great. Some of my clients just want to be AAA. I want to be the best. And then when we talk through, well, to do that, you probably got to get your fund balance to 40%. And they say, well, okay, well, if I got to that AAA, if my lower interest rate when I borrow is just a tiny amount and it's not going to save me a lot, then it's not worth it to say to the citizens, I'm going to raise more money to build fund balance. So if we go all the way back over to the dashboard, what we really like for clients to do, if we zoom out, Raj, maybe it's over to the right, we really like to put in policy levels of where you want to be. So in the general fund, unassigned fund balance, like the target you'll see up there is 25%. So if I key in, Roger, if you'll put in 40% as an example, then it's going to light up in red anywhere where you violate that. So we love it when clients will say, based on peer comps and my budget size and my exposure to hurricane risk and future needs, I've decided that my fund balance policy is 25%. That's where I want to be. And that becomes sort of the rumble strips for when we're doing this planning to then, it's real good guidance for Charlie and Bob to be able to say, council, that's great. If we want to fund all these projects with cash, we can do it, but you're going to violate your fund balance policy. And then in the utility fund, I'm not sure if we've got that over there to the right. Yep. There are 2 ratios that lenders look at. Sort of fund balance, they call it days cash on hand in the utility fund instead of as a percentage, but it's basically the same thing. If you had 360 days cash on hand, that's 100% of fund balance. And then debt service coverage ratio is the other ratio that lenders look at, which is how much revenue do I have available to cover my debt payments. If I had $1 million of revenue available and $1 million of debt, that's a 1x ratio. They like to see it higher. So, Charlie, I know you've, I don't want to take too much time, but what we really wanted was everybody to see the model, understand the functionality, and then hopefully I think that everybody would say, like it, want to keep using it. This is sort of the tool, the anchor that we'll come back to when we're deciding which projects we can fund, what order, what dollar amount.
Yeah, this is something that we've been working on as far as input back and forth with First Tryon, myself and Bob for probably the past, really more the last 6 months, but I think it really kind of got started about a year ago, was starting to. And then obviously every time we look at it, especially Bob, he's getting back with Raj, getting back with Amy. Well, I think you need to change this cell to this, and one of the things that you'll see, as you run out on general fund, you're showing, it shows impact fees all the way out to the year 2060. Well, realistically, we're not going to be collecting impact fees that long, so it just runs out. So as we move forward, we start, those type things just continue to get cleaned up. New things get added, maybe new things get taken away. And then obviously, they take in our financial statements into effect or into account and things like that. So, really just wanted y'all to be able to see this, know that we now have this tool available to us to be able to use as we have these conversations, whether it be budgetary or strictly around capital and future projects and things like that, and be able to ask your advisors any questions that you may have on it. So anything else on that y'all have got, questions or anything on the?
That was showing 6 million towards Catawba, is that right?
Yes, sir. That was just, what we did was took in the initial phase one estimate of the 6.25 and stuck that in there, more as a placeholder, and we'll get into Catawba Park as the next one. Yes, sir.
Okay, so is this something that, like, is it web-based? Are we gonna get, like, usernames and passwords, and we're gonna be able to go in there and play around?
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
just
available
an
for the public?
It's just an Excel document.
Okay.
So it's not a web-based, it's not a password protected. Most of the time, staff will run it or have us run it. So put you all and staff in the position of asking the what-if scenarios, and Raj and Amy and myself are driving the model, but you own it. It really depends on your comfort level of Excel. I've never had a client where the general public wanted to run it, but I have some finance directors that say, this is great, Walter, send it, like the city of Greenville, we built it for, and we see it about once a year. They'll send it back and say, hey, we broke something in it, can you update it? Can you put our audit in there? But then they run it the rest of the time, and then we have a lot of clients that say, we got a workshop coming up, in the weeks leading up to it, we're working with staff to get the latest capital improvement plan in there, but then council is really wrestling with, okay, we can't fund all 50 projects. What are we willing to let our ratios look like? And let's start making the decisions to turn projects off.
So I can email the document as it exists now, that Excel document. I'll most certainly email that to council either later this evening or first thing in the morning, so you can see the functionality of it. I can tell you that I tried to start changing some things, and the formulas in there are very complex. So that's one of those, all right, don't save it, just close it, and then let's just open it back up kind of thing. But it's definitely a great tool as we get to future budget workshops, especially as we get into July timeframe, as we're doing a budget presentation and having that conversation with council, would be an excellent time to have them back. So that way they've got at least the requested budget. They've got that plugged in there, and we can see what that impact is going forward, and what do we want to turn on, what do we want to turn off type thing.
Looks great.
Great. Look forward to seeing you.
All right.
You want to talk
They're
about the
gonna
next?
hang out for the Catawba Park conversation too. So, Raj, can you pull up the phasing map that I sent you? Yeah, perfect. So council, up on the screen, and this is in your packet as well. This stuff we could send you ahead of time. I want to turn your attention first to the phasing map, nice little colored map of Catawba Park. This came from our engineers, Campco Engineering that's doing the park. And you can see, phase one in its totality is primarily the baseball complex, the open play meadow, as well as the maintenance facility that would service the entire park. It also includes the main driveway entrance and loop. So you've got some things that aren't specific to the baseball complex, but and a lot of this has to do with how they need to grade the property to be able to move water, from point A to point B. And then your phase two, which is the purple and the bluish color down towards the lower end of there, is your soccer complex. So just as Amy and Walter kind of talk you through the model that they put together as far as funding, really what we looked at was phase one. We had them look at what you see on the map, the phase one and phase two. If y'all recall, as I sent you that document on Monday, we had phase one turned off, or excuse me, phase two turned off, and then I explained how you could turn phase two on, and it would show you those impacts. So with that, Walter or Amy, if you want to just kind of walk council through that funding model, they've got paper copies of the two tabs on the worksheet.
Great, Amy's going to do this one.
Sure. All right, great. So this is sort of a mini model from the larger capital planning model that Walter just walked you through, isolating the revenues that are available right now as we understand them for Catawba Park. So just going left to right, the first section that's in yellow there will be your revenue sources. So you've got your, if I can read that, your fund balance there, the parks and rec impact fees that are, and these are the funds that are already built up, so that are available right now as of 2020. Then you have the fees that have been generated, thank you. Fees generated to date from the Windhaven, and I guess the ones that are online, scheduled to come online within the next couple of years. Then you have additional, I guess, the proposed section of the Windhaven impact fees, and then impact fees from other developments that are within the city.
Correct.
So
So just real quick, the fees generated by Windhaven column, so your third column in, that is the amenity, the fee in lieu of amenity, the $1,500 per household. Now, these numbers, as they exist today, do contemplate the proposal to be coming to council on your March 16th meeting with the amendment. Obviously, if council decides not to do that amendment, then we'll have to adjust these numbers down. I think the change on the amenity fee and impact fee as it relates to Windhaven was about $500,000, if I recall correctly from what I've sent you in the past. So that's what the middle column is. And then the Windhaven impact fee is just the Parks and Recreation portion of the impact fee. So that's not total impact fees coming in from Windhaven or the other developments. It's just the $4,317 portion of the impact fee that is for Parks and Recreation.
Great. So the next section will be the proposed debt. We've assumed for phase one that that amount would be $6,265,000. And then you have a choice, whether you use the funds that you've built up on hand already and apply that towards that project amount so you don't have to borrow as much. The advantage of doing that would be you're not paying as much interest. So that's how we've set this up now. So what's on hand will be used towards the project. We wouldn't borrow for that portion. And then the debt would be amortized over the same period of time that we expect the impact fees to come in. So you wouldn't necessarily want to borrow debt for 10 years if impact fees will be your primary source and you're not expecting those to come in at beyond a certain point in time. So we structure this over a 5-year financing, or 5-year financing. We've assumed an interest rate of 2% in there. And when you go to the far right, we're showing, I guess, the second to last column, that's your annual surplus or deficit. So how do the revenues that are available in that current year cover the debt service? And you can see you're okay for the first 2 years, and then pretty quickly thereafter, there's just under a $200,000 deficit. And that last column is really the cumulative running balance of those revenues versus the debt. So you you have basically a $582,000 hole at the end of that. So that is the result of Catawba Park right now. So that's where I guess there's either other phasing that comes in or
Right.
other revenue sources that are identified.
And we did look at, have them look at, phase 1 and 2. Raj, if you could turn on phase 2 on that second sheet.
It's not going to get better.
It does not get better.
doesn't look better.
It does not get better at all. But that phase is contemplated at 6.7 million. So some of the changes that have happened since the original cost estimates that came in from the engineers several years ago. The baseball complex has gotten bigger. It went from 2 fields to now 4.5. It also includes the soccer fields themselves. Initially, were just as grass fields. The pricing that this includes is with the artificial turf fields. So I know that looks bad, but I want to talk to council a little bit about how we can potentially still move forward. But while your advisors are here, just wanted them to walk y'all through this model. They do these models for us a good bit. Anytime where there's a potential of a borrowing, what does it look like? What does it look like with our existing debt, and things of that nature? Where's the hole? So that way, as we have a conversation with council, it gives y'all the opportunity to decide, okay, well, do it cheaper, or you didn't identify all the other, we're willing to do other revenue sources to help plug that gap. So, anytime, during your tenure on council, that we are looking to potentially fund a large project, especially with a new debt issue, you'll see models like this coming from First Tryon. So, before we start talking about what we can potentially do here to plug that almost $600,000 hole, anything for Walter or Amy on this question?
Total of 600,000, or is that 600,000 a year?
No, you're right at just under $200,000 a year for 3 years, yes, sir.
So 600 total. And the position that you're in, to the extent it's helpful, is not dissimilar to what we see with other clients. We're working with Greenville right now on a downtown park. We've done parks in Fountain Inn and other places, Florence, and it's always an exercise of how do we trim project cost and identify other revenue sources, and what kind of growth assumptions do we want to use. We've projected out conservatively on the impact fee side, but I think this exercise, I wouldn't approach this as an insurmountable hole. It's $600,000 on a project of this size.
Did you consider, or how did you estimate all the expenses occurring? Was it all in 1 year, or did you phase in, like, is the construction are we gonna spend all the money in 1 year, or is it gonna be a 3-year process to get through phase one?
The engineers contemplated phase one as a 12-month construction cycle. The borrowing would all come at one time. Usually, in that first year, it's interest payments, and then you've got an interest, and then an interest in principal payment going forward for the life of the borrowing.
Yeah, we can play with the structure and how we amortize the principal. The challenge in that is if you push principal out, you're paying more interest over time, and you have a finite set of resources right now. So that's the one challenge with that, but we definitely can look at that. And then the one thing we haven't factored in is if your project takes 12 months, there could be a small amount of interest earnings while that project fund money is sitting there waiting to be
Correct.
used.
This is also assuming full build-out of Windhaven, courtyards,
Correct.
Everything that's
So
currently
in your impact fees for other developments, it is what is still to come in with, that's only approved right now, with the exception of the apartment units in Game Home. Did not include any of that in there, and obviously there is no commercial in there because the commercial doesn't pay a Parks and Rec impact fee. So all the rest of it, so basically Susan does a quarterly development report that we put on the website. So for the purposes of this, we used her year ending 2019, so as of January, what is still to come in, for each of those units, including River Falls, Courtyards, Cadence, Lake Ridge, and all of that.
I was just going to ask you, is River Falls in this?
Yes, sir. And that's why we push it out 5 years. Basically, we took the total amount and they just divided it by 5. Now, obviously, if we get to a point where council is ready to move forward with a borrowing against, those revenues, we'll tune this schedule up even more so. So you can see, okay, well, like, for instance, I think when we looked at the TK Forever finances the other night, on Monday night, I think they were at 1.184. And this is showing 1.72. I mean, it's not a huge difference, but we'll update your cash on hand, and then obviously as your cash on hand goes up, the expected future revenues coming in on those impact fees will shift slightly.
I think that looking at these numbers, they appear a little scary, right? Anytime you try to borrow essentially $4 million, and we've done this once before, it's a little nerve-wracking. So I think it's important to, I don't know if Joey, if you're going to speak on it or who's going to speak to the conversations with Campco.
Either one.
Okay.
We had a very good conversation with the engineers this afternoon. By first to middle of next week, we're going to get some new numbers back from them. There's some parts in the phase one that aren't as critical and can be shifted into the phase two. So delayed, not eliminated. And then there were some things as we really dove into their numbers. We worked through, nobody uses bleachers anymore, and they've got $100,000 worth of bleachers out there. Well, that's something that we can add down the road. Most people like to, especially when you go to these tournaments and things like that, they just sit right up against the fence in their lawn chairs, things like that. Delaying the sidewalk around the baseball field, until a later date, is going to reduce some money. Not doing the entire orange piece, the loop that you see on the phasing plan, reduces some money. So we talked through several different scenarios with with our engineers today. And by probably Tuesday or Wednesday next week, we'll have that back. So what I'd like to do is, during my manager's report on March 16th, is be able to obviously I'll send you all those numbers once we have them, but be able to talk about that in more detail at the March council meeting. And basically from there, if council is comfortable with what you're looking at, obviously we'll take those new numbers, give those to Walter and Amy, so they can update this model. We'll get all that back out to you. And during that conversation at your March meeting, if council has that comfort level, then what we can do is direct the engineers to complete the construction documents and things like that. Get it out for bid. Let's see what it costs. At that point, you've still not committed yourself on any type of borrowing. You see what those bids come in at. If they are at or under what we're projecting or what our engineers are projecting on cost-wise, then at that point, I think council is able to have a conversation as far as, do you want a funding ordinance coming forward, so that we could engage the contractor and get phase one and break ground, and 12 months later, hopefully cut a ribbon on it. So
Is the project fully permitted? Do we have all of our permits, and have we done soil testing and all that kinds of things to prepare us to actually break ground?
soil testing, yes. The permits all would come from the city, with the exception of the obligatory DHEC sign-off on the grading plan. But yeah, we've already done all the soil samples, core samples, things of that nature. And that's one of the biggest challenges with this project is, according to your engineers, from New Gray Rock Road to the lake, you've got less than 1% fall. So it holds a lot of water. So dirt's going to have to be brought in, and that's what they're figuring into that price, so that they can elevate certain areas and push water, drain it. We've also asked them, and it is saving us money, and it's a little bit more environmentally friendly, to not use storm drain pipes buried underground, to use bioswales and things of that nature, rain gardens and things. The good thing is with the proximity of the creek and the river, we don't have to do permanent on-site water quality. So, the biggest challenge, I think, listening to the engineer this afternoon that he's having on the grading, 1A, he's got that draining well on 2B, the soccer fields. He's got to raise those up about 6 feet from the existing grade right now. So that's some significant dirt that'll have to be brought in, which is part of that. You see that big price on the phase two.
And environmental, all environmental studies for like animals, species, all that kind of stuff's been conducted, and
That was all actually done as part of our sewer force main that goes to Rock Hill. All the archaeological with the Catawba Indians, the Schweischer sunflower, I think, was the protected thing. The only thing that I don't think we've studied at this point is and this one's new, is the protected bats. That seems to be giving a lot of Federal Highway DOT projects a fit, but everything else is ready.
there weren't anything, nothing else was discovered.
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
I'm one of four, sometimes five. River Falls concerns me just because it's been promised for so long and nothing happening. So I feel like Lennar, I feel like Windhaven is going to do Windhaven. I feel like that's, I don't want to say money in the bank because it's never money in the bank, but I feel comfortable with that. I don't feel comfortable with River Falls. And
Okay.
in the terms of the way we're handling it with Campco, are we paying them to do some things that we can do ourselves simply because of recent history? Or are there things that we can manage ourselves with the project and not pay them fees?
Their fees included in here, outside of the construction, and testing fees. We do have them, doing project management fees. I believe for phase one, I don't have the price breakdown with me right now. I don't believe I do. I think for phase one, was about $100,000.
I thought I saw those six figures.
Yeah, so, yeah, they would be handling from bid to pay request for the entire thing. Really, there's, for something of this size, this magnitude, it would take myself, Tom, and Joey to work through that. This is a full turnkey service. Yes, sir.
On the, so I wasn't aware that the, soccer fields were changing from, just being the, like, fields to artificial turf. Can you talk me through that decision and how that was made? And, are there operational savings? What's the, like, capital, higher capital cost, lower operational? What's,
Yes.
talk to me a little
So
bit
so
about
yeah,
that.
you definitely have a higher capital, lower on your maintenance costs. Yeah, and one of the biggest reasons that we discussed, and it's not something that has to be done. I mean, we most certainly can start off with grass, and then as capital funds become available, turn to, convert into the artificial turf. But really, with the sheer volume of rainouts that we get, I mean, and it's, our programmers are having to cancel things, not because it's raining that day, but because it rained the day before. It makes programming difficult, and by having artificial turf, it allows us to bring in organizations like Charlotte Independence to host tournaments and things of that nature, which could drive revenue. With grass fields, the more you use them, obviously, the more beat up they get, the more expensive it is to bring them back around. It allows us to be able to use them on that year-round basis and still look top-notch. But again, that's just that's a $2.25 million for 3 artificial turf fields. As we get to that phase 2 section, obviously we can have those conversations. Hey, let's just do one and do grass on the rest, or no, let's go ahead. Let's wait until. The key with this, with everything you see in blue, once we touch it, we've got 3 years to finish it. That's part of our lease with Clear Springs. I would assume, I would rather not touch that property until we got 100% ready to roll on it, for certain. So, but that's the reasoning behind the artificial turf, was really just because of the wear and tear and beating that our fields are taking now, and the sheer volume of rainouts they continue to have.
Any other questions?
How does that, impact stormwater with the artificial turf?
Doesn't. I mean, actually, it's probably, it's just as good, because you've got a nice drainage system underneath it. So the water still permeates through, but it filters through a membrane and gravel and things of that nature. So there is no additional stormwater impact, because it's not a full pervious surface.
Well, the only questions I have don't pertain to these folks with the money side. It's more park side, so I can wait and do that later. But
Okay.
if there's any other money questions with anything? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Is this the spreadsheet you sent us?
Yes, what she was just talking about, yes, sir, that is what I sent you. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And obviously is, when I get when Joey and I get the updated numbers back from the engineer based on our conversations today, and get that over to Walter and Amy. I mean, the other thing we'll absolutely do is we can back out the River Falls, projected impact fees if that's what council wants us to look at. Most certainly.
We, before we would say, gee, I hope River Falls or Windhaven never gets built. And now we've got impact fees, and boy, I sure hope it hurry up and gets built. Just in 4 fast years, it's all changed like that. It's how times. The question I had that didn't pertain to money is we bought that chunk of land for this park, this field that's.
Additional field.
Is that the one at the 2 o'clock position there as we look at it here?
Yes, sir. That is
And-
correct.
Okay, so then Diana Davis isn't in the mood to sell yet? Did we ever?
Still not in the
negotiate
mood to
with her?
sell. I
Okay,
got a feeling when the T-ball field's in her backyard, she
Well-
may, but she knows what's coming. She has seen the plans.
I think as soon as that first bulldozer hits and the noise and all that stuff.
Possibly so.
We're gonna give her Heather's phone number.
Understood.
I've talked to her many, many times. I
Yes,
love
sir.
that lady, but
Yes, sir.
she's the one that I think Heather's got a good rapport with people like that. We can make that happen. All right, well, this looks very encouraging. I like seeing when we finally get a plan going down.
It's something we shared with TK Forever Group on Monday night, and it's hard to see here, but when you're looking at the construction set, the press box there in the middle of the 4 big baseball fields, they really went to that next level. So there's a brick pattern around the outside of it that is home plate first, second, and third, to where we can do the sell a brick, the buy a brick type thing. Down at the soccer area, as you come out of the parking lot there, going into the main entrance of the soccer field, where there's a concession stand and restrooms, there's a soccer pattern that they've got envisioned, and that would be into the concrete for that buy a brick type thing to allow folks to be able to do that. So just those little details that they've taken into consideration and listening to what we've had to say, I think they've done a fantastic job.
I love that little T-ball insert. That's really. that's
Yes, sir. So
excellent.
it's not a
I would
wasted
imagine
space.
if
Yep.
we ever do get Miss Davis's property, that would be another, maybe
We have s-
parking and T-ball or
We
something.
could do parking, we could do additional batting cages, possibly another T-ball coach. The way we had, that's how big is that field, Joey?
It's around 120 feet, and the one goal that we wanted to make sure of was to be able to program from ages 3 to forever, and that accomplishes that because it basically creates a T-ball field for our younger
And it can serve as
participants.
as a practice infield when we're hosting tournaments. So the infield will be cut back big enough to where when the older kids are then, doing a tournament, that kind of thing, they've got a warm-up field they could actually utilize as well when we're not using it for our local younger kids programs.
So I should ask when those other people were here, but so we start building the park and corporate donor comes in with $1 million.
Correct.
What do we do with that million? Do we pay it on principal? Do we put it in the bank and make payments with it? What do pay down the debt? What do we do?
I think all those options would be available. Obviously, the first thing
Whatever Bob says, right?
the first thing we would look at is take that corporate donor. It would depend on whether it's coming in a one lump sum, being phased in over several years. Those dollars could be used to pay down debt to where your impact fees can sit, as they're coming in. Or if council, if we've got, the idea would be to come to you and show, okay, without impacting your taxes, or your millage and things like that, here's what you can fund, here's what we can afford to do with, all the various assumptions. And as those corporate, donors, corporate sponsors come in, we're able to add, potentially just add additional things. So anything that we're taking and delaying, or would be delaying for a phase 2 to where we can get out there and get something done, it might could get brought back into the phase 1 while the contractor's working. In talking with the TKK Forever Board, one of the things that they were very clear on, and I don't disagree with them, it's been tough trying to get corporate sponsors for a facility that has been discussed since 2007. So we feel like the work that they're doing, and you definitely have some very extremely talented people on that board, once there's, dirt moving, yeah, it gets a little bit easier to, attach somebody's name to something.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and sell that name,
No,
so.
totally agree.
Yeah, I think this has kind of been a little bit of a pipe dream for over a decade now. And so, to pony off of what Charlie was saying, this is also something that, has been, or we've stated is, one of our highest priorities. And so I think we need to take that into account. Again, noting that borrowing all of this money, we need to make the right decision and do it carefully. I will note on Phase 1C, so that kind of pink area there in the middle, just now as it is, just is an open play meadow as opposed to having the amphitheater in there. Which again, somebody comes in and says, I want to, put up $1 million and be the donor for the amphitheater, then that can get back added in. But it does give us the ability to move those large scale events, our concert series, our fall festival over to the park so that we're able to host them and grow those events. Again, that community engagement piece, bringing it back in so that people can see that it's actually happening. I will also note, too, TKK Forever did offer a recommendation to council. It was unanimous to move forward with Phase 1 of the plan.
The other thing, and again, this doesn't get into as much of the funding on the capital side, but, and Joey can speak to this, to the baseball side of it very well, as far as tournaments. So, I mean, these are the two sides, the two parts of the components of the park, I would say, that would drive revenue. Not just at that facility, but, if you talk to the folks in Rock Hill with Rock Hill PRT, with the economic development that comes in areas around facilities like this, where tournaments are getting hosted and things of that nature. We've been having conversations with Charlotte Independence, who we have a partnership with, have for a number of years. They have a desire that once we do build the fields, that they do want to partner with us on it to the tune of a sizable annual payment. That could either go towards general maintenance of the entire park. It could go towards debt. We're not planning on those type funds to fund the initial capital, though. So, Joey, if you want to talk briefly about this, the baseball side of things.
Yeah, so, obviously with the park of this nature, it takes a vision, and seeing that building something of this magnitude not only impacts our recreation program, but truly the community, gives us obviously an opportunity to present an attractive option for new businesses to come in, as Charlie mentioned, around the facility. What we envision from a programming standpoint is being able to accommodate our local league play during the week, whereas in the past, we were Monday through Sunday from sun up to sundown for a lot of that. But having those additional fields allows us to maintain a lot of that during the week, which then opens up the weekends for tournaments. And, doing a rough estimate, we're anticipating on being able to be open for this roughly 30 out of the 52 weeks a year. And I think that may even be conservative for tournaments. It's obviously going to bring in additional revenue, and not only additional revenue from the actual tournament fees, but also in hospitality tax as well from visiting our businesses and hopefully eating and drinking as well.
So getting this off the ground is always the hardest part. I think like you were saying, once we get this going. So it's going to take everybody kind of, like when you have a home budget and you're trying to buy, like Gus does, a nice boat or a nice car. Every year, you got to tighten the belt someplace else. And we've been very generous with the people who work for us. We've had great police stations, and great fire stations, and great equipment. So I don't know how, we can't do everything. So if this is our priority, is this park, we're going to have to say, guys, ease up on some of the stuff, the shiny, big shiny things that you like to buy all the time. We're going to have to say, we can't do everything. You know what I mean? So I think this is for this year. We said we got to do public safety first, and we did the fire station, and then we did the police station. Mm-hmm. So now I think we got to get back to the people who pay the taxes. They want a park. Yes, they want the fire and the police too, but so this is going to be the big thing. So let's don't say we want all brand new, nice, shiny things and all that stuff that goes fast and looks good, but because this is going to be, And then when this revenue starts coming in and the businesses and the H-tax, we can start, being like we used to be, very generous to other stuff. But
Okay.
I think this is the focus we really need to look at.
Yes, sir. Understood.
And I've got just a couple technical questions. One, is there, I think it's been a while since I've been, gotten some information and specifically about what exactly is included in here. So is there an opportunity either to present to council what the
Sure.
plans are for Catawba Park, and probably for the public would be interested in,
Most certainly.
in learning more about what exactly is in phase one? How is parking gonna work, all those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But then also I had a question, just knowing that, there's a large residential neighborhood across the street. Anything or any concerns or anything that we're specifically doing to help with the lights or the light pollution?
Absolutely.
That would be created from
You
the
wanna
baseball
handle that
field?
Yeah, so in regards to light pollution, one of the things that we were required to do as part of our lease agreement with Clear Springs was to make sure that the lights on the fields did not impact the neighborhood that's close by to it. So they did light surveys and studies to make sure that that's not impacted as well. Other things that we've done to obviously be good hosts to Lake Ridge, given its proximity, is during that first phase, you'll see a sidewalk connection to the Bluebell, the existing trail there, that will give walkability to the park as well.
And all of our lights, like if you look at Rundy and Turner, and if you remember Rundy before we replaced the lights just a few years ago, if you were at Turner, you could tell the lights were on at Rundy. They were so bright. But with the new sports lighting technology, and we've got it at both of our existing facilities now, they've got the visors on it. So when we first kicked on the lights at Turner back in 2001, the lighting engineers were out with their measuring the foot candles. And 5 feet behind the pole in the parking lot, they had less than 2% spillover from light pollution. So making sure the lights stay where the lights are meant to be. So that same technology, same type apparatus will be incorporated in here as well. Yep.
Cool, that's good.
And also something else to think of is New Gray Rock Road, is it going to be a little country two-lane road forever?
Correct.
Is there room for expansion? I don't want to have to lose a ball field or a
Right.
couple.
No, there'll certainly have to be, I would imagine, and the good thing is Camco Engineering does a lot of the engineering with RFATs. You've probably seen some of those guys at the RFATs meetings. But I would envision that there probably will have to be some stacking lanes. So as you approach the actual main driveway, turn lanes for the right turn lane, and then a center turn for the other, and all that's being incorporated in it. And DOT will most likely require those type things as part of their encroachment permit for the main entrance driveway. Yes, sir.
But also room to expand that to like a 5-lane road at some point, which it will have to be.
It can, without impacting the ball fields.
Right.
Yes, sir. Maybe not 5, but I think you can get to 4. 5, we may have to just do a big wall on one of them, like like at Fenway. If we have to pull that fence in a little bit, but no, I think we'll be in good shape. Yes, sir.
Will you maintain the existing vegetation that's there as a buffer between the road and the baseball fields, or?
As much as possible, and where there's not much there other than a lot of scrub things. So landscaping, we're not including in this initial phase. But as we've done with several of our other more recent projects, we'll self-perform those. But yes, we'll definitely want to have nice landscaping across, especially just outside the right-of-way there, as it relates to the ball field, most certainly. It looks like a very dense forest as you drive down New Gray Rock Road, but once you actually walk back in there, you've got large pockets where there's just nothing. So where trees can be saved, they will be saved. As you move closer to the creek that you see there on the map, you get a lot more areas that are just being left completely natural. We wanted to make sure that it was a environmentally friendly facility, and that's the direction we gave the engineers as they work through the designs.
Any final questions before we motion to adjourn? All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Bye-bye.